Learning how to make vegetable broth.
Is really easy. All you need is some vegetables, water, a pot, and time. There are a lot of different recipes for vegetable broth. Some of them are more involved than others in terms of the number of vegetables. Do you brown them in the oven first? Things like that. But for what I want to do for my Argentine recipes and my southern recipes, when I make soups and stews, this really simple, basic vegetable broth is enough for me. Here I have my saucepan, and I was going to measure everything in grams, but I figure most people in the United States don't, so I'm just going to eyeball everything. I have some celery. This I'm going to break in two. I don't really chop it up, I just break it. So that's one celery stalk with some smaller celery stalks that have the leaves. One small carrot, I'm just gonna break into two. I have 2.5 garlic cloves that I peeled. One small onion that I had off to the side in water so that I wouldn't start crying. Goes. I'm going to add about 6 cups of water off with this, and then how much? Well, just say this 3 cups, and then I'm going to add what is, in my opinion, my secret ingredient: bay leaf. I like to add 2 to 3 bay leaves. These are kind of on the smaller side, so I'm going to add, I'll say 2.5 to 3. You could definitely make this with just the celery, carrot, and onion. That will give you a great vegetable broth. But in my opinion, I think bay leaf in vegetable broth and things like chicken soup, chicken stock, beef broth, things like that, bay leaf will give your soups and stews and broths and stocks that extra flavor. And if you've never used it before, you don't realize what you're missing. But the first time that you make a soup or a stock or a broth and it's not there, you'll think, what's missing? Honestly, I think bay leaf is a secret ingredient in a lot of things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this to a boil on high heat, and then once it starts to boil, I'm going to lower it down to low and simmer it. My vegetable broth has been on high heat for about 10 minutes. Now it's at a roaring boil. So now I'm going to turn it down from gas mark 6 out of 6 to 2 out of 6. I'm going to let the broth simmer for 1.5 to 2 hours. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of videos here on YouTube teaching you how to make vegetable broth. Some people add things like mushrooms, seaweed, bell peppers, green onions, leeks, a lot of things. But honestly, I think that this really simple yet flavorful vegetable broth is really good if you want something that's flavorful but that won't overpower what you are making and will let you add on to it. Speaking of which, I was doing a bit of research for this recipe just to see what other chefs are doing on YouTube, and one chef, actually 2 chefs in the video, they said that they would recommend not using cruciferous vegetables, so things like broccoli, kale, things like that, because they will give your broth a very strong flavor. And I tend to agree with that, because when I think back to the times that I've added collard greens to soups and stews, it definitely flavored the broth more than I thought that it would. I like collard greens, but like I said, I think if your broth is the base for another recipe, using broccoli or collard greens or kale could give it too much flavor. What else do I want to say? I am using vegetables that look good but maybe not perfect. If you have some celery that looks like it's on its way out, like it's having a nervous breakdown or something, If it's not moldy, I think you could put it into your broth. If something looks like it's moldy on one part but the other part's still fine, I would put it in. I know that some people, they collect bits of vegetables and they put them in a big freezer bag, and then when it gets really big, then they'll make broth. You could do that as well. But then some people say that doesn't taste as clean. So, I don't know. This is what I do. I think it's easy. It's flavorful enough to be good, but not so flavorful that you can't use it in a variety of recipes. So I will bring you back later on. This vegetable broth has been simmering on low heat for about an hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to let it go at least another half an hour, maybe another 45 minutes. I know most recipes say to simmer it for 2 to 3 hours, but what I usually do is I turn off the heat and then I let it cool down for another half an hour. So maybe I simmer it for an hour and 45 minutes, we'll say. What I did want to talk about is the difference between vegetable broth and vegetable stock. I did some research on it, and honestly it seems like there's still some controversy, some disagreement, but it seems like vegetable broth is made from pieces of trimmed vegetables like this, but vegetable stock is made from larger pieces of vegetables with more leaves, more roots, is more of the vegetable. And that broth is meant to be a finished product where you could use it in super stew, but you could also just drink it on its own. But stock is meant to be something that's used in another recipe. So it's not the finished product. That's what I found. I guess it kind of goes back to with meat, broth, and stock. For example, chicken broth is made with the meat and vegetables, but chicken stock is made with vegetables and bones. So either meat on the bone, like drumsticks or chicken leg quarters, or leftover bones from a roasted chicken, something like that. Honestly, I think people are still in disagreement. I'm gonna call it vegetable broth in this video. I've called it vegetable stock in other video recipes, but yeah, I think this is probably vegetable broth. My vegetable broth has now been simmering on low for an hour and a half. I'm going to turn it off. I know, like I said, a lot of recipes go for 2 to 3 hours, but I usually let mine cool off for about another hour, so I think it'll balance itself out. As you can see, about half the water is gone, so if you do want to simmer it a bit longer, probably going to want to add some more water. Let's look. I think the vegetables have lost a lot of color. The water is a light greenish brown. That tells you that a lot of the flavor and a lot of the nutrients have left the vegetables. So as you saw there, the celery looks a lot wider than it did. The carrots, they've lost their vibrancy. The onions, they've lost a lot of their color as well. So like I said, that means that the flavor and the nutrients has left the vegetables and gone into the water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this cool for another half an hour, maybe longer, maybe up to an hour or so. My vegetable broth is now completely cool. It's been almost 3 hours. Things got away from me, but that's okay. Now I'm going to strain it. I have my plastic container, a small strainer. You don't need to use a paper towel, but I like to put a paper towel or part of a paper towel in the strainer so that it's just easier to throw everything away later. So I'm literally just going to strain it like this. And once all the liquid is gone, I'm going to take my vegetables, put them into the strainer, and notice how I said earlier the color was gone. You can really tell now. Then I like to give it an extra squeeze to get a little extra out. And there is my vegetable broth. This is amazing in soups and stews. My puchero, my chicken soup with polenta, a vegetable stew, a tomato sauce, a tuco. Awesome. What to do with the leftover vegetables? They have given up almost all of their nutrients and flavor. So everyone online says to just put them in the compost pile. That's what I think is the best course of action. So unfortunately, I do not have a use for them. But I do have a lot of uses for this beautiful vegetable broth. This is enough for soup for one hungry person or two people. This can be frozen. When I freeze it, I put it into quart size freezer bags and I put them in the freezer. They should be good for at least 3 months, maybe up to 6. So if you want to learn how to make vegetable broth, here's an easy and delicious recipe. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.